I want to hit you with some of the latest numbers that are out there as sports are becoming an interesting prism, an interesting window into the overall collapse of double vaccines. Let me repeat this. Sports leagues, NHL, NBA, NFL, all have 95% plus of their overall players, support staff, everybody vaccinated, yet the number of people testing positive for COVID right now is skyrocketing. I just want to hit you with some of the stuff that has happened in the last couple of days. Toronto Raptors, Thursday game has been postponed. Calgary Flames, 3 games postponed. Chicago Bulls, 2 games postponed. Current outbreaks in the NBA at the Charlotte Hornets, the Nets, and the Knicks. Tottenham Hotspurs across the pond in the EPL. Also, Miami Dolphins' entire running back backfield currently out with COVID. The LA Rams in the last hour, after having 5 players, 5 starters, I believe, not able to play because of COVID, have just shut down their facility. Same thing has happened with the Lakers, and the Cleveland Browns have announced that they have 8 different players in the COVID protocol. What is going on? I'll tell you in a moment what needs to happen, but what's going on is significant because sports is oftentimes the canary in the coal mine. Remember when we shut down everything, which now we kind of recognize was a total disaster, back in March of all the way back in 2020, almost 2 years ago now, it was because primarily of the outbreaks that we were seeing in the world of sports, particularly in Oklahoma City. Now what we're seeing is the sports leagues all are where Joe Biden and Dr. Fauci is telling you that if we were all there, COVID wouldn't be an issue in this country. Except the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL are all having to cancel games because so many of the young, healthy players in those leagues are testing positive for COVID. So, what should happen? I made this argument yesterday, and I was the first person with any kind of audience that I had seen make this argument. But I am going to keep beating this drum. We have to stop treating COVID different than the flu. COVID is never leaving. It's going to be endemic on some level in this country and in this world forever. Now, positive side is hopefully at some point COVID mutates to a point where it's not as virulent for older people, right? Maybe that's what Omicron is. We don't know for sure, but the data out so far suggests in much of the world that Omicron, at least if you look at the South African data, and if you look at the English data, and if you look at the Israeli data, and you look at the early data we're getting in America, is a less virulent and dangerous form of COVID than the Delta variant is. All this talk about variants and mutations has been focused on the idea of the variant or the mutation getting worse. The reality is that very often what ends up happening is the mutation ends up getting less significant, less severe, and then if more people get it, that can be a pathway out of COVID being where it is now. But the larger context here is we just have to get back to some form of normalcy. How do we get back to some form of normalcy? If you are asymptomatic, you shouldn't be getting tested. I don't know why the NFL needs to test anyone in the NBA and the NHL if they're not symptomatic and feeling poorly. If you test positive and you are otherwise healthy, you should be able to play. This shouldn't even be a difficult proposition. If we don't adopt this proposition, then there are going to have to be a ton of games canceled in the NBA, the NHL, and the NFL because COVID's not going away. And because the COVID vaccine, this is the truth, even though some people don't want to acknowledge it, is more of a therapeutic than it is a vaccine. What do I mean by that? The COVID vaccine, best case scenario, seems to protect you against severe injury or death, severe need for hospitalization, severe illness. That's not a vaccine. A vaccine, at least in the normal context in which it is used, protects you from getting the virus in the first place and certainly should protect you from spreading the virus. That's not what the COVID vaccines do. They are basically therapeutics so that if you get COVID, you're going to have a less severe outcome than you would theoretically if you had not gotten the COVID shot in the first place. But I got to say, the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL need to adjust in real time. They need to change what they are doing when it comes to this overall situation. They are not going to end up in a position where they are going to have success if they continue to apply the same story that they are right now and the same policies. They are going to fail. That's what they're going to do. They're going to fail.